of you who are joining us. This is Portal in conversation with Prue Stevenson and Dr Pete Koval, and we're so glad that you could join us for this hour together. We would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands in which we are zooming in from. We're all coming to the webinar from different places, but we are all living on unceded land. I'm currently on the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, just by the beautiful Merry Creek, which has been a place that has deeply sustained and nourished me, especially over these last 2 years. And we would like to pay our respects to elders past and present, and to any First Peoples here with us in the conversation today. This land was never ceded, so it's a joy and a privilege and a responsibility to live and work on this country. I'm Kate Sulan. I'm the Artistic Director of Rawcus, and I'm thrilled to be able to facilitate this conversation today. I'm a white woman. My hair is loosely tied up in a bun. I'm sitting in front of a wooden door with some stained glass LED lighting behind it. And today I'm wearing some lipstick, especially for the conversation that we're about to have. So this talk that we're about to have today is part of the Science Gallery's conversation series, and it accompanies an exhibition that's on at the Science Gallery at the moment called Mental. And Mental is described as part exhibition, part experiment. It's a welcoming place to confront societal bias and stereotypes around mental health. It presents over 20 experimental projects from local and international artists and research collaborators that reflected a range of different perspectives on mental health and ways of being. It's a place to explore, empathise and question what it means to be human, using science, technology and creativity. So in that exhibition Mental, you can see an artwork by Rawcus and artist Prue Stevenson called Portal. And in a minute, I'll get her to introduce herself and the work. But today's conversation brings together an artist and a researcher. And together they're going to talk and share their perspective on sensory overload, emotional self-regulation, and how sensory play can help support a sense of well-being. I'm delighted to introduce them both to you. So we have Prue, who's give us a wave. Prue is the Rawcus Ensemble member, visual artist and consultant for Amaze and Get Skilled Access, and a proud autistic person. And then we also have Dr Pete Koval, who's an emotion researcher and academic in the Melbourne School of Psychological Sciences and the co-director of the Field Lab. Welcome to you both, and thank you for being part of this conversation today. I'm going to start by asking them to introduce themselves to you. So maybe I'm going to start with you, Prue. Would you like to introduce yourself, give us a small visual description and tell us a little bit about Portal, the artwork?
All right, thanks, Kate. Well, I'm a white person and I'm wearing a lavender polo shirt, and I have dark brown curly hair, and I'm in my living room, and there are a lot of flowers on the couches and the rug. And I'm an artist. I make artwork I work with materials that match my sensory profile, and also use processes, put them through a process that it is connected with self-regulation and promotes downtime. And Portal is an interactive installation which is made, it has materials like velvet and sequins and string and chains, and it has elements like weight and which I have a big snaky shaped sculpture that is full of sand, and it's really heavy, and also light. Like there's a holographic plastic curtain fabric that is very holographic, and lots of touch. There we go. Short answer.
That was great, Prue. Thanks, Prue. And Pete, can I invite you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your work as well?
Sure. So my name's Dr. Pete Koval, and in terms of my appearance, I'm a white male wearing glasses and with dark brown hair and facial hair, and I'm sitting in a white room at the moment. And I'm a senior lecturer in the Melbourne School of Psychological Sciences at the University of Melbourne. And as Kate, as you said, I'm co-director of the FEEL lab, and FEEL stands for Functions of Emotions in Everyday Life. So as the name of our lab suggests, my colleagues and I are interested in understanding people's everyday emotional lives. And in fact, it's probably a little bit misleading of us to call ourselves a lab, because what we do mostly in our research is study people's emotions and how they respond to their emotions in the wild, so to speak, rather than in laboratory settings. So we use smartphones to track how people are feeling, as well as what's happening in their environments and how people try to regulate or manage their emotions as they go about their usual daily routine or daily activities. And what this means is that the data that we collect can be quite messy and complex, but also we hope more representative of real world emotional functioning than what we might learn by only studying people in relatively artificial lab sorts of experiments, although we do also use those in our research. And I'm particularly interested in describing how people's feelings fluctuate from one moment to the next, and trying to understand or describe the patterns in those fluctuations, which are often called emotion dynamics, and to understand how emotion dynamics, different patterns of emotion dynamics, relate to well-being and adjustment.
Thank you. That's great. So the way today is going to work, it is really a conversation between Prue and Peter, and I'm going to be more in the role of timekeeper and just steer us along. So the conversation is going to go where it goes, and I've invited them both to pose each other some questions and answer the questions and follow the conversation where it goes. So there is also, hopefully at the end of the session, there'll be time for some questions from the floor. So there's a Q&A function that we can use. It's you'll find it down the bottom of your screen. Please feel free to put some questions in that, and hopefully we'll get them to them at the end. All right, so I'm going to invite Pete to ask the first question. Over to you, Pete.
Thank you. Thanks very much. And thank you for the lovely introduction, Kate. So Prue, thank you for the description of the work portal. I think that gave us, all of those of us who haven't had a chance to interact with the work directly in the Science Gallery, sort of a nice description of what the work looks like and what it feels like to interact with and be there with the work. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about what inspired you to make Portal and what you would like people who come and see and interact with Portal to take away from it.
Well, I think that it comes from, as an autistic person, I was taught out of my natural regulation practice, which I call stimming, and it comes from the word stimulation or stimulatory. And so learning how to unmask my autism, part of that was reconnecting with my stimming practice. And through researching and discovering, reconnecting with that, I realized that it's not only autistic people that practice stimming and need stimming. It's actually like my assistant dog Disco stims all the time, and my dad, who's not autistic, he stims all the time, and that connection with sensory profile, with an individual sensory profile, and how one way that I regulate won't be the same as the way you would regulate, Peter, because we have different sensory profiles. And I think with Portal, it's really about trying to create a space where people can access and explore their sensory profile in their own time.
Right. Well, could you maybe tell us a bit more about what stimming is, at least for you, or what it might look like if somebody is stimming?
Sure.
and how that relates to Portal?
Sure. So stimming is the repetitive movement that people do, particularly autistic people. We need it a lot more than an average person. However, everybody does. And it's really connected with your sensory profile. So for example, my sensory profile, you've got under responsive and over responsive sensations. So a lot of people have heard of hypersensitivities. So I'm hypersensitive to smell and sound and touch, which means that my brain can get overloaded from that information, that type of information. And my brain is hyposensitive or under responsive to vestibular, my balance in my inner ear, and proprioception, where my body is in space. And so I tend to like a lot of movement. I love rocking. I love flapping my hands because, again, it's giving me information of where my body is in space, and my brain seeks that information naturally. And part of this stimming practice that I do is I've learned that it's really important to stim in or to self-regulate in ways that are safe for me and safe for others. And when I was younger and didn't have this knowledge, I had behaviors of concern like headbanging, and that was because of my sensory profile. My brain was not getting enough feedback consistently, and it was seeking it and in bigger ways and harmful ways. So I've learned that I need to regulate on a much more frequent level. And with Portal, it was really creating that space. It is, from my perspective as an autistic person. However, I tried to make it really broad so that anybody, any brain can come to that space and body and explore what is their personal sensory profile and how do they self-regulate. Did I answer that question?
Yeah, beautifully.
That was succinct.
It's your turn, Prue. You get to ask You get to ask Pete a question now.
Oh, it's my turn. Okay, Peter, let me read my question.
Sure.
Okay. When you research emotion regulation, do you take sensory information into consideration?
Great question. Thank you. Well, it's an interesting question. When we research emotion regulation in our lab and the kind of work we do, we typically ask people to self-report, to just tell us, what kinds of things they're doing to try and regulate their emotions. And we take a kind of broad view, which is that we ask about strategies for regulating that focus on the function of the strategy rather than the specific behavior. So what I mean by that is we might ask somebody, over the last couple of hours, have you tried to distract yourself from your feelings or from your emotions? And we're not necessarily asking them or interested in exactly what kind of activity or behavior they did to allow them to distract themselves. So that can kind of have some advantages and disadvantages, I think. One advantage is that we can see similarities between quite different kinds of behaviors that people might do that serve a similar function. But of course, the great disadvantage is that we don't really know what it is people are doing in terms of the details of their regulatory behaviors. So we don't really know to what extent people are doing things like stimming or other kinds of what I might call embodied forms of emotion regulation versus doing things that are more mental or cognitive kinds of strategies that don't involve interaction with physical objects or involve kind of changes to the posture of your body or moving your body. But if I can just pick up on something you said before, Prue, about what stimming is and how it helps you, I think it's really interesting because psychologists and neuroscientists do think that emotions are very much embodied, meaning that the way that our brains kind of create emotions is by interpreting signals from our bodies, partly, as well as interpreting things going on around us in the environment. So I think we probably need to pay more attention to how sensory input plays a role in not only creating people's emotional experiences, but how they try and manage or regulate their emotions too.
I wholeheartedly agree, Peter.
Great.
My turn?
Yeah.
Or was there a question in there?
You can ask.
No.
You can ask another question, and then we'll come back. If you've got a question ready, Prue, and then we'll come back to you, Pete. How's that sound?
All
That
right.
sounds good.
My next question that I wrote on the shopping list. Don't tell my housemates. If you were to use Portal as part of your research for emotion regulation, how would you collect that data?
Well, that's really interesting, and I would love to have the opportunity to do that. Well, I think Portal, for those of you in the audience who haven't been to the Science Gallery, is embedded in a broader exhibition at the Science Gallery called Mental, and so there are many other works as well that are displayed and that people can interact with when they go to the Science Gallery, which evoke all kinds of emotions and other kinds of experiences as people move through the gallery. And so I think an interesting way to study emotion regulation in relation to Portal, your work, Prue, is perhaps to measure people's emotional experiences as they move through the Science Gallery and interact with various exhibits, various installations, and sort of try and predict when they might be likely to or drawn to going to explore Portal, your work. Perhaps they walk past and see that Portal looks like the kind of place where they might be able to maybe pause and have a bit of a rest in terms of mental stimulation, also be able to interact with its physical attributes. And so I would be interested in sort of trying to predict when are people more likely or more likely to gravitate towards Portal because of the function that it can serve to help people regulate their emotions. Perhaps some of the other works might make people feel, uncomfortable sensations or emotions, and if we measure those by asking people how they're feeling and also maybe asking them or measuring which works they're interacting with, could be interesting to see how that predicts when they go and see Portal and how long they stay there. And then I would be interested in seeing how their feelings change as a function of them interacting with the work Portal. So presumably the interacting with Portal could help, if not all people, then at least some people regulate maybe upsetting or distressing emotions. So it would be really interesting to see who it's most effective for. And if we have some kind of way of measuring background information about people, we might be able to see if we can predict who it's going to be more effective for, depending on various kinds of individual differences.
So is that like it would be like a map of people's movements with a timeline and how they feel over that timeline in relation to the map?
Exactly. Yeah, that's a very
cool.
succinct way.
Let's do it, Peter.
I'd love to.
Awesome.
All we need now
My
is for the
people will
Science
talk
Gallery.
to your people.
What were you saying, Peter?
All we need now is for the Science Gallery to invite us to, rig up the space with all the kind of instruments we need to measure people's feelings and where they're moving around.
Have you got like a measurement on like how likely a person would say yes to something with something you give them, like cheese? Like if you give someone some really fancy cheese, maybe they'll be more likely to be really into your idea. I mean, you're the emotion regulation doctor. Surely we can come up with something creative to make this happen.
True. We typically reimburse our participants with money rather than cheese, but I think most of them are probably spending the money on nice cheese, I would imagine. So it's not a bad idea to use that.
From my knowledge of working with Prue, there's not much. Cheese is a good incentive.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Pete, I believe you have a question for Prue.
Yeah.
You
Sure,
ready, Prue?
I'm ready.
So Prue, from this conversation and the previous conversations we've had, I've got the impression that you've got a really sophisticated and quite detailed understanding of your own emotional life, in terms of, you're being really aware of what kinds of environments and stimuli can make you feel strong or even overwhelming emotions. And also, you seem to know quite acutely what strategies and tools help you manage your emotions. And you spoke about some earlier. So I guess my question is, as an autistic person, what do you think the neurotypical community, if I can use that term, can learn about emotion regulation from understanding your own journey of learning to regulate your emotions?
Well, firstly, I don't use the word neurotypical, because I think it's othering, and I use the term non-autistic instead, because it's not my right to assume someone else's neurotype, and I think everybody's neurodiverse, so everyone's welcome to the party. And I think that stimming, even at autism conferences in Australia, is a really taboo topic on a medical side, not a lived experience side, but there's still a lot of discrepancy between medical and lived experience that, that gap needs to be filled still quite a bit. And I think that when people have the invitation to regulate however feels right for them, then it's a lot safer, I think. I mean, regulation's really broad. I think of it from like self-harm to sexual pleasures. So it's for me a very broad topic, and there are many functions to it that are really good. But I think that main kind of idea of regulating in ways that are safe for you and safe for others is really important, because there are heaps of people who with things like domestic violence, I can imagine that rate going down if people learn skills in how to regulate their emotions in ways that are safe for them and others. And often when I feel an emotion, I feel a sensation in my body and I don't know what that sensation means. I'm quite under responsive to my interoceptive sense. So I might feel a sensation and go, do I need to go to the toilet, or am I feeling excited? Or am I sick? I can't tell the difference. So often I kind of analyze and question a sensation my body is feeling, and it might be something like I'm feeling really angry. And once I can name it, it's easier. I find it easier to regulate. And often I will ask my community to support me in working out how I'm feeling. And then I have strategies in place for if I feel really angry, then one thing that I've found makes me laugh a lot is if I have an apple in the fruit bowl, I will, and I can access it on a sensory level, I will eat an apple really angrily. And it just makes me laugh. It just kind of diffuses the emotion, because biting feels really good when I'm angry, but I can't bite the back of my hand because that'll hurt me, and I can't bite other people because that'll bite them. So if I have, and there are heaps of resources that people have made for the autistic community, like chewable jewelry, which it's BPA free, so it's safe to chew on. And so I think like the autistic community have a lot of really great tools and resources in supporting regulation. And it would be really great if we can I feel like if more people tap into this, I think of it like a superfood. It's like, if it's much more fun than broccoli. But if, say, broccoli is a superfood and everyone's like, oh, that's the superfood, let's get more of that. The autistic community has stimming. And if more people tap into our version of superfood, then I think we'll have a much safer society.
Wonderful. Prue, there's so much in what you just said that I'd love to pick up on and discuss
Go
more.
on.
So Kate, please do interject when this goes for too long. I think that one of the really fascinating things you spoke about, which applies, I think, to all of us, is the way that you sometimes have a physical sensation in your body, and you may not be certain how to interpret that. And according to constructionist theories of emotion, we all do that all the time. That's what our brains are constantly doing. And emotions, according to this way of thinking about emotions, is emotions are actually constructed by us when we categorize, when we interpret signals that we get from our body, but also from outside of our bodies, by interpreting what's going on in the environment and so on, as an emotion. And so, to a certain extent, for many people, it may feel effortless, but we're all doing this all the time. And so that explains why, for example, you might experience, be more likely to experience anger when you're hungry, hence the term hangry, because, your body can, or your brain rather, can misinterpret signals that it's getting, about the state of your energy levels, or in fact, maybe it's not a misinterpretation at all. It's actually relevant to, your brain kind of encoding or categorizing what's happening. If you're hungry and you're lacking energy, perhaps you need to be more on guard and kind of quicker to anger than if you're really well satiated and have lots of energy to help you deal with or adapt to whatever challenges might come up. So that's really interesting, that perspective that,
I have another one that
Go ahead.
I've recently made a new nighttime routine before I go to sleep. And because sometimes I get really anxious, and I'm scared of the dark, although my assistant dog helps me with that, take out the boogeyman. My new one is doing some stretching and also blowing bubbles. I love blowing bubbles, and I don't know why, but when people are like, oh, Prue, you're anxious, do some breathing, for some reason, I just get really irritated by that. I don't want to do some breathing. I'm feeling anxious. I don't want to go and do what I'm, I don't know what it is, but I just don't, it's not fun. I don't find breathing that fun, but bubbles is a really fun way to trick myself into regulating my breathing.
Right.
And so part of my nighttime routine is blowing bubbles. And another one is a head massage, massaging my head.
I think, all those kinds of strategies that you've spoken about, I really agree that, everybody could benefit from broadening their repertoire of emotion regulation tools by sort of experimenting or trying out lots of those different things you mentioned. And I don't think you're the only one who finds, breathing, paced breathing or slow breathing boring and kind of balks at the idea. So I think blowing bubbles or other kinds of techniques to turn it into a game, there are people out there designing apps to gamify things like this as well. So I think there's a lot.
Making regulation fun. Oh yeah.
Exactly.
Rudy.
Can I pick up on one more point, which I think was really interesting? Prue, you said that when you try and interpret the signals that you're getting from your body, that when you're able to label the experience, that helps in itself. And that's really fascinating too, because psychologists have studied labeling as a form of emotion regulation too. So getting people to verbalize their emotion experience can actually lead to faster recovery, basically helps people to feel better when they're feeling distressed more quickly than if they just keep that experience in their heads and have it be only an internal experience. And similarly, talking with other people or writing expressively about upsetting feelings can also help. So that's really interesting that's something that you've discovered.
Oh yeah, another thing that I do is I have like an outline of a human body. And then when I don't know how I feel, I draw different colors and mark making on that body, and that helps me. Then I can take it to a friend, take it to a person and go, this is how I'm feeling. Here's a drawing of it, and they'll help me interpret. That's another strategy to kind of work out, like, I don't know how I feel, but visually being able to draw it, really helps.
Fantastic.
Go on, Kate, jump in.
Whose turn? It's your turn, Prue, to ask Peter.
My turn. Are you ready?
I think so.
Peter, have you considered broadening your research to regulation practices outside of emotion, such as sensory, social, hormonal communication? Yeah,
so, well, I think since we've started talking, Prue, I definitely have, but, this has really opened my eyes. This conversation and the conversations we had leading up to today have really opened my eyes about the importance of tapping into some of those more sensory or embodied forms of regulation that we don't necessarily focus on in our research. There are other researchers who do study this kind of thing. And in terms of the social element, I'll come back to the sensory in a minute, but in terms of the social element, we do try to study how people use what's called social sharing, which is really just talking to other people about their feelings or about their emotions as a form of emotion regulation.
Have you tried the other way though, where you're looking at a person's behavior and working out how they're feeling through their behavior?
That's really challenging. And so I have been involved in some research that does that, that tries to do that. So where you observe people maybe interacting with each other in, say, two people talking in a discussion, and then, video record it and analyze second by second or frame by frame what each person is doing with their body and their face, sometimes also their voice, to try and understand or interpret their emotions. But there are sort of universally, supposedly universal expressions of emotions that some researchers have posited, but there's a lot of debate about that. And so how you interpret what a person is expressing plays a large role. So there are some sort of standardized coding schemes that people use in research. They might say, if a person has a particular action unit, they're called, on their face, a particular muscle on their face moved in a particular configuration, we're going to consider that an expression of sadness or an expression of anger or what have you. But as I said, there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of debate about how to interpret those kind of things. And the theory that I talked about earlier, the constructionist view of emotion, suggests that we can't really directly interpret people's behavior as a readout of their internal experience, that there may not always be a match or a congruence between how people are feeling inside, subjectively, and what they're expressing. And we know this also from research on emotion regulation, that people deliberately try and hide their emotions. And we study that as well as a form of emotion regulation. So when people are feeling upset in a particular context, like maybe in a workplace, they might try and hide their upset feelings or their anger from colleagues or from a boss or whatever. And we know that people are quite effective at doing this, but it's also pretty taxing on them. And so it means that they physiologically remain quite highly aroused, and it can actually have all sorts of negative or unintended consequences in terms of whether they're able to keep paying attention to what's happening and respond flexibly to the conversation or the social context that they're in. So it's difficult to read people's emotions from their faces or their bodies, because we know that people don't always express themselves in the same way from one moment to the next, and different people express themselves differently too.
I love how thorough this research is. So much fun.
I've got some questions coming in that would be lovely to ask the two of you, and then we can you can both respond. So the first question that came through was, how do you think we can become truly more in touch with our feelings? Sometimes it feels like we're too cerebral or overthink our feelings rather than just naturally being able to feel our feelings.
I'm happy to answer first, if you don't mind, Prue.
Yeah, go on, Peter.
Do you want me to repeat the question, Prue? Or did you get it?
Oh, I got it.
Great.
I just think, this is definitely a Peter question.
Well, I think actually Prue has already spoken about some of the ways that we can really just more directly feel our feelings. And I think one really important way that Prue's spoken about a bit is to pay attention to our bodily state. So as I said, many emotion researchers now consider emotions to be at least partly a way of our brains interpreting signals that they're getting from our bodily states. So if we can sort of train ourselves to pay attention to what kind of shape our body is in at any given moment, are we feeling full of energy or tired? Are we feeling excited, not necessarily in a positive way, but just sort of aroused and excited, or sleepy and lethargic? Are we feeling hungry or satiated, etc.? Those kind of, like, paying attention to those bodily sensations can actually help to get more directly in touch with the basic ingredients of what emotions are made of. And the other thing I think that Prue also spoke about is, then in response to that, trying to more kind of deliberately find a label for that emotion that seems to fit. And that might involve, writing it down, or maybe drawing a picture of a body and kind of indicating on the body where you feel the sensations that you're experiencing. And through that process, we might be better able to kind of tap into the raw ingredients that actually go into an emotional experience, without sort of imposing the more complicated categories that we learn, like, labels like sadness and anger and fear and so on and so forth.
Do you want to add anything to that, Prue?
I guess I'm just thinking about how when I feel emotions, my brain keeps going blank and I keep forgetting the question.
About how we can be truly more in touch with our feelings is the question.
Yeah, I keep thinking about sensory profile and how fidget by design objects and like how one of the ways that I started to work out my sensory profile was by the things like working out, like, I guess I questioned why I do certain things, like, why do I do Taekwondo? What is it about Taekwondo that is really great for me? And I realized, like, Taekwondo has a lot of jumping and spinning and physical contact, and that works with me being seeking that, like, balance and where my body is in space. And also things like I can't do Taekwondo anymore, and so now I'm doing singing. And in Taekwondo I used to do a lot of yelling, because we do a key up to express our, like, get more power, use our core strength and express that's expression. And so I've gone into singing, which is like a socially acceptable way to scream in public. And I think that, you know, trying to kind of question, why do you have passions in certain areas, and are those passions connected to your sensory profile? Then you can start to work out, well, how can I activate that sensation in a more often way? Like, how can I do it in public? How can I do it at work? How can I do it on public transport? How can I do it at a party? So then you can, maybe when you go to a party, you start getting really overwhelmed and stressed. So then you can have like a fidget by design object that is connected with your sensory profile, and that will help you regulate and be there for a longer period of time. And same as work, like you might be a pen clicker. You might like to click your pen. Why do you like to click your pen? What is it about that sensation? Does the person sitting next to you in the office, are they hypersensitive to sound? And so that pen clicking is actually activating something that's not good for your colleague. Is there a way that you can get that sensation that doesn't have the sound component?
That's great. So go for it.
Yeah, if I could just respond, I think, Prue, again, you've touched on some really interesting points, and I think that really aligns with probably the most prominent and well-known model of emotion regulation in the psychology literature, which is James Gross's process model of emotion regulation. And the idea is that there are sort of multiple points in an emotion that you can intervene and try and change its course. And Prue, you just spoke about, I think my interpretation of what you said is that you spoke about two sort of families of emotion regulation strategies. The first one being situation selection. And that is, you know, people choose actively to put themselves in certain situations and to avoid others, or, you know, to engage in certain activities and not to engage in other activities, with the aim of changing or influencing how they feel. And I think, Prue, you've become aware of this much more than I think most people are. So maybe simply, you know, learning about this model and trying to apply it to your own daily life, as you've suggested, Prue, would be really useful. And the other family, the next family of strategies that I think, Prue, you also spoke about, was situation modification, which is, once you find yourself in a situation, whether it's of your choosing or not, you can still do things to try and change the features of the situation in an attempt, again, to influence how your emotions unfold. So, as you said, Prue, you know, bringing something with you to a party, for example, that will help you deal with maybe uncomfortable feelings you might experience for whatever reason, would be an example of situation modification, I think. So I think people can really learn a lot from the things that Prue's talking about, and trying to, again, apply those to their own lives and analyze what it is they do in an attempt to influence how they feel.
Woohoo! Look at us collaborating.
That kind of, there was a question in the Q&A about how you identify your sensory profile. So I think that spoke to that question. There's a few others coming through, but there's one that says, what are your thoughts on the recent mainstream and neurotypical trends of self-care, a lot of self-love, or positive vibes only? Do you think these trends truly help us, or is there any room for improvement?
I feel like I'm very disconnected to pop culture, Kate.
Yeah.
I don't really know if I know those trends. I think that I know that Pete has done some research in this area, and I also know that, like, it is very good to say nice things about yourself, and sometimes it's easier, well, often it's easier to say nice things about other people than it is about yourself. And practicing saying nice things about yourself, it's like muscle memory. You just, you know, you practice it, and then it becomes an automatic thing that you do, like stimming.
So yeah, Prue, I agree with what you've said. Despite the fact that I might look very hip, I'm also like you, Prue, not as in touch with pop culture as I might be. But I think from my understanding of these movements of, self-care and self-love, I think that they're coming from a good place and the intention is very good. And broadly speaking, attending to your emotional needs. We've spoken about that many different ways that people can try and do that already today. So I think that in general, the idea of sort of taking a step back and taking a moment to analyze what it is that you need emotionally and trying to find ways to satisfy those needs in a safe way is probably a good idea. And Prue, yeah, the kind of self-compassion or self-kindness that you talked about, I think has been shown to be helpful in many, many studies. So taking a kind of similar approach, as you say, that you might have to a friend who you show concern for, but applying that to yourself can be really helpful. But I would say, on the other hand, perhaps, in the questioner's wording, there was the implication that there may be too much positivity, and there is, I think, a kind of an optimal point, or a point at which, trying to be positive all the time can actually backfire. And we have people in the Melbourne School of Psychological Sciences who have studied this as well, this kind of idea that too much positivity can be a bad thing because it sets up a potentially unattainable goal of kind of feeling positive all the time, and maybe doesn't leave enough room for those inevitable moments in life where things don't go as planned and where we maybe do lose some control over our emotions or become overwhelmed and distressed, which is a normal part of the human condition. So actually, self-compassion, which I spoke about a moment ago, part of that is really recognizing that it's normal and okay to fail and to experience setbacks and to experience difficult emotions, and that we should be accepting of those rather than necessarily always trying to transform everything into a positive.
I think also that a lot of these things may be part of the reason why I am not I don't know about them, is because they tend to be very word heavy. They're very language based, and that's not my strength. My strength is more around my sensory perception. And so I think sometimes, these things are very language based, and you could just have a shower and maybe that would feel good. I think of showers as portals. Sometimes I just find water so healing. But some people like to have a cold shower. I am not one of those people, but I just find the water is a great way to kind of put my mind in a different perspective.
This question is kind of connected to this conversation, which is they're asking for advice for those who only want to acknowledge happy and push away or don't tolerate anger, even though they experience it. Do you have any advice for?
I just feel like if you look at toddlers and they're having a good old tantrum, or you look at I have a park across the road from me and a kindergarten, and kids are screaming, and if they and I always think, wow, they're really good at regulating. That's so good. If only adults could do that too. And I feel like there's a certain time, age, where you kind of age out of regulating, and that's not okay. It's really not. You think about, okay, if I'm really angry as a toddler, I might scream and want to punch stuff and bite stuff and stomp on the ground. It's not really hurting anybody. Aside from the volume level, and maybe there's a spot where it's okay to do that kind of volume level, maybe you need to start singing, or now they have those, I've heard of these things, they're like a room that you hire and you smash stuff. It's like a smashing room where you can like put a bunch of breakable things in and get some sort of smashy tool and smash it all up. And I feel like that is fantastic. That's such a, and there's a place for it. And that's the thing, we all need to find a place for that type of regulation. And I think often people are like, you know, we're taught that this is appropriate behavior, this is how you behave in this situation, but we're not actually given a space that's appropriate for all the other ways of being an animal.
That's so great. Prue, I've got a question specifically for you. I find sensory friendly spaces in venues and events overwhelming as a person who's hypersensitive. For example, lights on and kids making noise freely is the stuff that puts me into sensory overload mode. How do we support venues to understand that sensory friendly spaces are actually disabling to people who are hypersensitive?
I think with this, like I do a lot of environmental audits with Amaze, who are the peak body for autism in Victoria. And we work with a lot of different environments. And one of them is places like Acme. And they have a relax session at the same time every month for their exhibitions. So where they bring down the lights and sounds and the bleeding sounds and stuff, and there are less people, so it's more accessible on a sensory level. I've also I did a work at a similar thing with the State Library of Victoria recently, and that's the first time that we'd ever been invited to an environmental audit halfway through the design process. And often environments, you know, they have a standard. They're like, we need to be this wide for a wheelchair user to fit through, and we need whatever it is. And they don't have a standard on a sensory level. Well, not that I'm aware of, not like, for example, Dyson hand dryers are they're in every government building. That's a standard that they have. And so it was quite interesting working with the State Library of Victoria on that, in that design process. So because often we get to the environment and we need to kind of make some choices around, does the environment change, or do we have a relaxed session with a social script that explains these are the sensory barriers that may come up, and you get that information before you go, so then you can plan ahead of time. I need to take my noise cancelling headphones. I need to take a fidget by design object. I need sunglasses in that environment. So often the kind of the pressure, the responsibility is on people with sensory differences to with a widened sensory perception to take like a suitcase of resources to support them, where I think that there needs to be more of a responsibility put onto the environments and the people that create those environments from the beginning of their design process.
That's great. We're heading to the end of our time together, but I just wanted to finish with a question to both of you, which is, you know, is there anything that you're going to take away from this conversation that might change your practice or your research, just from this perspective of just from hearing from each other? Pete, do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah, I'd love to. Well, there's a couple of things I think I'll definitely take away from this experience and having the opportunity, the privilege to work with you, Prue, and Kate, and other colleagues who I've had the pleasure of meeting with. One is that I've remembered how important it is to have fun and derive enjoyment and laughter from my work, which is something that I always had and experienced during our conversations, during our meetings, and I always left our meetings feeling really warm and energized, and found this made me actually much more productive. So I'm definitely going to try and take that with me into other projects and other collaborations. But more on a kind of substantive level, I have realized through our discussions that there's a pretty big blind spot in emotion research, or at least in the way that I do emotion research, which is that we don't know a lot about how people regulate their emotions through more physical, bodily or sensory strategies like stimming. And that maybe we're actually losing a lot of important detail by focusing on too high level of abstraction when looking at emotion regulation, and focusing on those kind of families of strategies that I talked about in the process model, rather than actually trying to understand more on the ground what kind of behaviors people are doing, and maybe trying to incorporate things like sensory or physical bodily strategies into the kind of toolkit of emotion regulation strategies that we study.
Great, thanks, Pete. And Prue, we're hitting close to 2, so
I don't remember the question.
I will ask you again. Is there anything from, talking to Pete and having this conversation that might change your practice or that you're thinking about?
Oh, I love the idea of this whole data collection collaboration with Peter and working out how we can make the people map, location map with the emotion timeline. I love that.
Fantastic. Well, there's so much to think about in that conversation. Thank you both so much for your time and the conversation today. And you can experience Portal. It's part of the Mental exhibition. It's on till mid-July at the Science Gallery. I recommend it. I recommend all the going to visit that.
And also, I recommend, if there's anything in Portal that you experience or in Mental in general, and you're like, oh my goodness, that felt so pleasurable to me, try and make something similar at home and have that in your environment, in your office.
That's great. So you can get a recording of this conversation. This conversation is being recorded. You can watch it. It will be up on the Science Gallery website, I believe. Yeah, just once again, thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us, and thanks to Prue and to Pete very much for joining us. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Science Gallery.
Thanks, Science Gallery. Of course, thank you to the Science Gallery as well.
And thanks.